Okay, thanks, Leah. And I really would like to say hello to everyone who's watching us this evening on this first episode of your program. So when we speak of a country's reputation, we're speaking of a country's reputation generally abroad, outside its shores. So we're speaking of a reputation which we really need to work hard for. It is something like which precedes you. You know, when you meet someone and they tell you your reputation precedes you. Well, generally they tell you that if you have a good reputation. If your reputation precedes you and it's a bad one, they're not going to say that, but they will be judging you. So we're a state, we're a sovereign state, but we're not alone in this world. So we're a sovereign state within the Mediterranean, an EU member state, part of the European continent, and part of the globe. And this means that we have relations with everyone else surrounding us. When you have a relation, even if you have a personal relationship, you really need to be on your best behavior. You really need to be, to be seen and looked at well, especially when you are in a relationship where you have signed to undertake certain obligations, where you have signed and agreed that you share common values, you share common standards. So we ourselves have agreed on a certain standard of state administration. And that standard of administration needs to be looked after. Yes. It needs to be cared for. Yes. Now, if you go about appointing people rather than on meritocracy, you simply appoint whoever owed you something or gave you something, just, as a payback, then that's not necessarily going to help your reputation. Yes. Because, of course, meritocracy brings about a certain preparedness, yes, a certain element of capability. So if you've appointed someone who isn't really prepared for the job, you're really testing the waters.
So what we're saying that the standards might not be high enough to what is expected.
It's not just a question of standards, it's also a question of how to behave. Imagine appointing an ambassador, for example, and appointing an ambassador not because he is academically qualified or because he's professionally qualified, but because you like the person.
Yes,
Let's just leave it at that,
yes,
because you like the person. But this person may really not know the protocol that one needs to follow.
Yes.
He may find it very difficult to represent you because it's very difficult for him to enter into the network within which he needs to represent you.
We're going to speak a bit more about that with Dr. Borg Cardona a bit later. Our first guest, we're connecting with a gentleman in London, somebody who's, I call him a risk guru, which he is. He's emeritus professor of Columbia University, where his topic was banking and money. And he's also been a director of the Bank of England, where he supervised all risk operations for all the banking sector in the UK and all the building societies. And we're joined by Dr. Colin Lawrence. Good evening, Professor Lawrence. How are you?
Leah, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Fine, thanks.
Thanks for inviting me on your program. I really look forward to it and realize this is your first part of this series that you've been created.
Thank you very much. We're delighted that you're with us. I'd like to speak today, Professor Lawrence, about reputational risk when it comes to governance. How important is good governance, and what are the implications when it comes to foreign trade and dealing with foreign affairs?
I think governance is and reputation are two of the critical factors, and particularly in international trade. Right now there's a good example with China. Most of the world are very unhappy that China were not transparent in their disclosure of the virus. And already countries like Australia have threatened sanctions. And this does not hold China in good esteem and countries can take radical action against China as an illustration of this. And I also, an interesting thing listening to Therese about the people that are appointed, okay, on the basis of how good they are at the job rather than kickbacks and things of that nature. So I should add today international funds, which are all the sovereign funds in the world, all the pension funds, all the saving funds invest in different countries, and there's what's called ESG standards, which stands for ethics, S is sometimes sustainability, and G is governance, ESG funds. And when countries behave poorly, both in terms of disclosures, in terms of not being honest, in terms of lack of integrity, monies get moved out very quickly. So it's always good for a country to enhance its trade position and as well as its negotiation position to be honest and transparent.
How do you rectify a situation where the reputation is already starting to be tarnished or is already tarnished?
You take immediate action. There are a couple of core principles. Theresa spoke of one of them, that the person that's nominated to the role in negotiations or representing a country, if the person isn't honest and is dishonest and is in bad repute, you should replace the person immediately because they're hurting the country. And the other thing I'm harping on is transparency. Once you lie, and we're living in a very dangerous world at the moment where there's contagion of alternative facts happening all the time. So countries have to know whether they can trust other countries. So I look at the United States, for example, and I genuinely believe that the White House is telling unbelievable lies all the time. So no one trusts them. Now, the United States might be big, but basically countries are going to take action regarding that. They might not boycott their trade because the US is so big, but they'll hold them in disrepute, and that will hurt the United States, let's say, evolving as a global leader. Yes. So when the president gets replaced by another president, say Biden gets elected, it's going to be difficult for Biden to basically get America back on track to provide some sense of leadership and cooperation in the world.
When we're speaking, obviously, of the USA, such a vast country, and then we can compare it with Malta, we've got no natural resources. We very much rely on foreign trade, on foreign relations, foreign companies coming here and operating from here. How do you rectify the position in such a small island?
On a small island, you've got to play according to the same rules as a big country, and that is that the people elected in government must be of, understand you have a political regime, but it's got to show that it's fair. It's got to have a standard of morality in the country. And in terms of negotiations with other countries in trade, it's got to choose the best people that really understand what they're doing. And once, people are elected, I don't know that much about Malta, but in many countries right through Africa and many European countries, people that, deal in kickbacks and where there's crime involved and mafia and all that sort of thing, you lose credibility, and that impacts your international trade.
Therese, what do you think of what Professor Lawrence is discussing with us?
I think what Professor Lawrence has said can really be exemplified by what has taken place in our own country, unfortunately, over the last few years. We've had a stream of reports telling us you need to prosecute, you need to implement legislation on anti-money laundering and anti-corruption. But we've seen day in, day out, a number of political appointees or persons appointed into public office who, or about whom there are even magisterial inquiries, yet everything else seems, it's like you have a magisterial inquiry opened against you, but life is normal.
Yes, yes.
And I think this is a real good example of what the professor was saying.
Yes.
Because
I think he's not with us anymore. I thought he was still with us.
Okay.
But for those of you maybe who've just joined, that was Professor Colin Lawrence joining from London. I thank you very much, Professor Lawrence. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be in touch again soon because the subject's very vast. I thank you very much. The subject is too vast to handle in one program.
But it is also an important subject. It is important for everyone who resides in any country whatsoever, especially when you consider that each one of us invests heavily in their personal and professional development. Now, if you take Malta, an island state, an island sovereign state, part of all the regions within which it is found, and you have every individual who's heavily investing in his own profession, we know that each one of us depends on foreign clients.
Yes.
Our market is just too small for our businessmen. So even our businessmen is going to depend on foreign markets.
Yes, yes.
Our tourism, I mean, one of our big sectors, big economic sectors, depends on foreigners.
Absolutely.
So we need to be in the foreign news for good news.